Hello, everybody. So this is me re-recording the presentation I gave in class that I didn't record accidentally. Yeah, here it is. So there's two of these. There's going to be HTML5 and CSS3, and then we're going to talk a little bit about responsive web design and why we use it. HTML5, CSS3, these are just the most current forms of HTML and CSS. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. HTML is like the skeleton of our website or our web page. It is the structure that everything else is built off of. CSS then is like the meat and the muscle and the sinew and the guts and all the little organs. It's what makes it pretty. It's what makes things work. You can have a website or web page that is just HTML with no CSS whatsoever, or at least none that you add. The browser does add some to it. But for the most part, you use these in conjunction. HTML is very, very specific, and CSS is less specific. But let's take a look. So some things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about HTML structure. Again, that's that really specific structure that I was alluding to. It's very, very important that HTML gets written in a very certain way. And then we're going to talk about how we connect or link HTML and CSS files. We're going to talk about CSS syntax, so how you write CSS. And then we're going to talk about parent-child relationships, because those relationships within the context of web design really matter for when you're adding CSS and trying to move stuff around and make things look good. So HTML structure is built upon this idea of elements. The elements are shown here between these angle brackets. The root element, the base element, it's called the root, is the HTML element itself. You have to have the HTML element in your document, in your file. This is how the browser knows that it is an HTML document. The two children of the HTML element, the two default children of the HTML element, are the head and body elements. Each element is made up of two tags, an open tag and a closing tag. And closing tag is denoted by a /. So your opening tag is just HTML or head or body or div or whatever, and then your closing element or tag is / HTML head or body or whatever. That's the structure they have to take place within. The head and the body here, in terms of parent-child relationships, the head and body are siblings to each other, but children of the HTML tag. They are inside, HTML element. They are inside the HTML tags. Each one of these individual things is called a tag. In terms of the structure, as it says here, everything that goes in the head is all of the settings for the page. It's everything that the browser needs to know about the page as it loads it. Everything that you want to show to the user then goes in the body element. It is within the opening and closing tags of the body element. So if it's outside of the body element, it isn't going to be rendered. It's not rendered, just means drawn or shown, made into an image. So we're going to be working in both of these, but we'll be setting up settings within the head and then constructing constructing our page within the body, what we're showing to the user. So linking our CSS sheets or CSS files, that happens within the head. We use the element called link. This one actually does not have a closing tag. It is just the tag, opening tag itself. It's essentially an empty tag. It just contains this reference. What kind of a link is it? It's a style sheet. href is a hypertext reference, and that is the path to the file. Now this is a relative path, not an objective path. A relative path, as you'll see or should see in the tutorial video for the first project, I talk in depth about it there, the difference between relative paths and objective paths. So you can just refer to that. It's very, very important though, so you need to know it. Parent-child relationships. In this example, we see here we have a really basic HTML page. We know it's HTML because it has the HTML element. Inside the HTML element, we have the head element and the body element as siblings, and then another level indented. These are all indented one level to visually show their parent-child relationship. Inside the head element, we have a title element and a link element. The title has inside of it some text. That's text that actually gets shown in the tab of your browser. And then we have a CSS file that we're linking to. Then we go to the body element. Inside the body element, we have a number of divs. Div is just an element that is a generic container. All elements, you'll hear me refer to them as containers because we stick things in them. So they contain stuff. These have different signifiers like ID and class, which I get into in the project tutorial, so don't worry about them too much right now. But there's text in here. So all of those divs are siblings of each other. They're all self-contained. They're not inside any other divs. They have text inside of them, but that's it. So they are siblings of each other, and they are children of the body. So hopefully that relationship seems clear. Something else we're going to talk about is semantic HTML and HTML5 content sectioning. This is just organizing your stuff using HTML5. So semantic HTML, it's the use of markup. HTML is itself markup, hypertext markup language, to reinforce the semantics or the meaning. Semantics is just a word that means meaning of the information in the web pages. This is what it looks like on code. We use semantic HTML to help show through the code what certain parts of the HTML are meant to be used for. And what this means is we have things like section and article and nav, and those are semantic HTML elements that are supposed to be used for a nav, or supposed to be used for a section of the page or an article of the page. And it's just best practice. Functionally, there's no difference between an article element and a div element, or a nav element and a div element. The browser treats them as being synonyms. It is really just for the people writing them and for the people looking at the code. It makes it easier to debug. Different types of HTML5 elements, semantic elements, are well, not body and div, because those are those are already built in. Those are older than HTML5. Aside sometimes, but really article, nav, and section are the ones we're going to use the most. Nav for doing navigation, sections for creating kind of your top level outline, and then articles for your more specific elements. You will see me use div a lot. I kind of sometimes don't use article all that much. Div is shorter and easier to type, and that's the only reason I use it. So really section, nav, article, well, div, and then article sometimes. So, an article gets used for an independent section of the document. Think like article, post, blog entry, comment, etc. Navs are used for the navigation elements. Pretty self-explanatory. Section is more a generic grouping of thematic elements in the content. And I definitely will use this a lot. In the Project 1 tutorial, you see that. So if you're curious, watch the tutorial again. And then here's some other things you can read to know if you're curious and want to know more about it. That's optional. So, okay, that was HTML5. Let's now do the responsive web design one. All right. So we're going to be using responsive web design. This is a style of designing for the web that makes it very flexible and adapts your design to the dimensions of the browser. This makes it fairly universal in terms of what devices your design will look good on. So it can be, it's always in relative to the viewport dimension, that's the browser, and it's something that just can change itself. We do it through using Flexbox. You can also use grids, but Flexbox is what we'll use the most. We also create flexible or fluid images, and I'll show you how to do that. That's actually, I think, it's in the tutorial video for sure. It's also in one of the class recordings. And then also media queries. And these are just sections of our CSS where we're asking the browser if it falls within a certain dimension, and if it does, then here are some new rules to override the rules that we had written previously. So, why do we use it? Well, we don't have to redirect. We don't have to send the users to different pages, like a specific mobile design page. That makes it easier and cheaper to develop and maintain websites. You don't have to have two separate websites that you have to keep consistent and current with each other. You just have one that changes itself for being looked at on a desktop or on a phone. This future-proofs you, forces you to prioritize the content, improves your SEO, gives users uniform quality and presentation, and then lets you just focus on details more than functionality. So yeah, good reasons. Those are all good reasons. Here's some more to make your designs fluid. Fluid is just a term we use to kind of stand for responsive. It's the same thing. It just means it can change. Think about how water adapts itself to whatever container it's in. Some things we use to do that, rems and ems. We'll use rems more than ems. Ems you can use, but ems are a unit of measure that is relative to the font size of the parent element. So if the font size of that parent changes, then the font size of the child will change. Rems, however, are similar. They refer to the default font size of the root element, but that root element, if you remember, is the HTML tag. So that root element is whatever the HTML's font size, that root element, is always whatever the browser's default font size is. And so if you just use that for everything, then you don't have to worry about sort of a cascade of different font sizes screwing something up. So you can really just focus on knowing that generally that's 16 pixels, and so like if I put in 2 rems as a unit, that's 2 times 16 pixels, so that's going to give me a spacing of about 32 pixels. I use rems for spacing, I use rems for font sizes. It's helpful to have that unit of measurement where you're saying 1 times this or 1.5 times this to help create a relationship of proportions. So if we know our font size is 16 pixels and I want my spacings to be like twice as big as my fonts, then I know that I should set my spacings at 2 rems. And then, or maybe 1.5 rems if you want it to be half again as big. It just helps create a consistent style, proportional style. So rems are really, really great to use. I use them all the time. Other thing we use a lot is VWVH. This is viewport width and viewport height. So this is taking our unit as a percentage of the viewport being the browser window. You'll see me use viewport width a lot. In web design, we're really concerned with width over height because the width is generally more static than height. Height can be fairly infinite on a web page. They scroll forever according to how much content is on them. So you'll see me use VW quite a bit. SVGs, we'll use those sometimes. These are scalable vector graphics. They are paths, not pixels. So they are infinite. They can be infinitely squished and enlarged without losing any quality, whereas pixels have a finite range. And then blocks of content. Really think in terms of how you want your content to be grouped. So things that belong together in the design need to be grouped together in the HTML. So visually, if it looks like it should be a group of things together, the spacings are kind of tight, or you have like a header, like a headline and a subtitle to that, and then like your body copy, those things should be grouped together in your HTML. And the tutorials will all show that, and it's kind of, you have to decide as you're doing your design how that needs to be organized. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, please email me, and we can set up a meeting, or I can answer it through email. So good luck and have fun.